Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at this event. My name is Deanna Kelly Said. I am the PEN America Piedmont chapter leader, and I want to welcome you to our town hall, What to Expect 2020 North Carolina. I want to share a little bit about PEN America in case you're unfamiliar. For almost 100 years, PEN America has stood at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and around the world. Today, we are in the midst of a global pandemic and an unprecedented election, and PEN is continuing this fight through hashtag What to Expect 2020 campaign, which aims to combat the surge of disinformation and misinformation that poses a threat to our free and fair elections. This effort includes disinformation defense workshops, community-level virtual town halls, and events for journalists at the local level, like this town hall right now, and a wider variety of resources that you can check out at pen.org. And we will post all of these links in the chat room throughout the discussion today. Today's event is presented in partnership with the Greensboro Public Library. Yay for libraries. Greensboro Public Library strives to provide free and equal access to information, foster lifelong learning, and inspire the joy of reading for all in the Greensboro community. Today is also presented in partnership with the North Carolina Local News Workshop, which was established in June 2020, with a focus on North Carolina residents' needs for high-quality local news and the information among rapid changes in news media and civic culture. Local news matters more than ever right now. And many thanks to our partners for your support in making this event happen. Before I introduce the moderator, just a few housekeeping issues. If you have any questions or comments, we will have time for Q&A at the end, and please submit those in chat and the chat room will be monitored. Our moderator for this town hall is Chantal Stevens, who was recently selected to serve as the ACLU of North Carolina's executive director. Prior to joining the ACLU of North Carolina, she worked in education for 20 years. She started her career at the Research Foundation for the City University of New York. And after leaving there, she worked for the City College of New York, A Better Chance, the GEO Project, and later at the Oliver Scholars. Thank you for moderating this conversation today. And now I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Deanna, for the introduction. I'm excited to hear from our esteemed panelists today. You know, racial constructions about white superiority and Black inferiority have been vital tools for justifying many forms of racial exploitation and violence. Voter suppression is one of the tools in the toolkit of white supremacy. And like much of the South, North Carolina was home to many forms of overt voter suppression and intimidation during the Jim Crow era. However, since then, voter suppression efforts have been more veiled, but are still very commonplace. Just for a little bit of background, we saw a nationally coordinated effort to win over state legislatures in the 2010 election through a project known as Operation Red Map, which resulted in North Carolina experiencing some of the worst racial and partisan gerrymandering ever seen in the redistricting process undertaken by the General Assembly. Then in 2013, the US Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in its Shelby v. Holder decision. And then immediately after that decision, we saw the introduction of really restrictive voter ID laws and other voting restrictions in North Carolina, among other states. These tactics were very clearly aimed at limiting Black turnout. And we know that was true in North Carolina because of how the voting tools and access disproportionately used by Black voters were the ones that were targeted. We are fortunate that in North Carolina, there are many nonpartisan organizations fighting against these suppression tactics and protecting the right to vote. And the ACLU of North Carolina is but one of these organizations working in coalition to protect access to the ballot. At the moment, we are partnering with other organizations in the coalition to register formerly incarcerated people to vote, to educate our members on their right to vote and the voter eligibility requirements. And we are educating voters around the importance of some down ballot races in key counties and the impact the outcome can have in daily life. As we go through this discussion, one of the things I really want us to keep in mind is that vote suppression is a form of racial violence. It is destructive, weakens our democratic institutions, and it cheapens our democracy. And one of the most pervasive forms of voter suppression we're seeing right now in the 2020 election cycle is misinformation. So we have an esteemed panel to lead us in this discussion about voter misinformation and the impact it's having specifically on the Black community. So with us today, we have Michael Hewlett. Michael is the legal affairs reporter for the Winston-Salem Journal. He has won numerous awards for his journalism, including a first place award earlier this year for his coverage of the alleged wrongful conviction of a Winston-Salem man named Merritt Drayton Williams. A graduate of Washington and Lee University and a native of Richmond, Virginia, Michael has lived in Winston-Salem since 2002 and is a member of the Triad Association of Black Journalists. Along with Michael, we also have the opportunity to hear from Afrique Kilimanjaro. Afrique is the managing editor and publisher of the Carolina Peacemaker, a weekly news publication founded by her parents 54 years ago. The Peacemaker is the longest running weekly in Guilford County, primarily serving Greensboro's Black community, covering everything from school desegregation and the turmoil of the civil rights era to the routine accomplishments and celebrations by Black residents. Afrique earned a Bachelor of Science in Professional Biology from North Carolina A&T State University and a Master of Public Health from Emory University. She serves on the board of the Cone Health Foundation. And lastly, but by no means least, we get to hear from Katrina Louie. Katrina is the managing editor of Q City Metro, which is a news, business, and culture platform for the Black community in Charlotte and the surrounding areas. Q City Metro promotes Black excellence, social connectedness, and civic engagement via an informed and collective voice online and in person. So as you can see, we have a stellar panel. Welcome. So to get us started, as we look at our country right now, we're in a global pandemic that's disproportionately killing Black and brown people. There are increased calls to address white supremacy, and we have systematic racism, and we have lots of racial tension nationwide. And we're also more politically polarized than ever before. How do you view your role as a journalist in this moment in our society? Why don't we have you start, Afrique?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it, Chantal. Well, you know, today, these are certainly some very unusual times, not just as, you know, citizens of our respective communities, but just, you know, just across the country. And as a newspaper editor and in journalism, I've found over the past few years that things that we've done in the past are now not very applicable to today's reporting. You know, we've got the pandemic, we've got a continued quest for racial justice, and an election that's occurring simultaneously. So we've got three things going on, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so today, the vetting of news stories was once conducted either at a reporter's desk or at an editor's desk in a newsroom, and often right now it's done in real time as the story is being released to the public. So, so you've got information being released at a rapid pace, but oftentimes it may not have that polish that a story would have that goes through an editorial process or you know, sitting down and talking to the reporter. There's just that time, that luxury of time. In a lot of instances is no longer there. So, you know, like with the pandemic, when it first kicked off here in the United States, you know, you've got with that you've got all the scientific information that changes so rapidly. And that's just simply the way that science works. You know, we're dealing with a novel disease process as it unfolds, and no one has all the answers. The scientists don't have all the answers. And then so that's why there's an immense amount of research that's being done, happening around the globe in studying this disease. its manifestation, its transmission, everything from its molecular makeup to effective treatments and the whole vaccine trials and all of that, people want to know about, because the main thing is they want to know, well, when is a vaccine coming? But we're in reporting on that, you want to give the public the information, the accurate information that you can at that moment. But be aware and be clear that that information is going to change. It's going to evolve. Same thing goes with what we're dealing with racial justice issues. There may be an incident that sparks outcry. Like we've seen with shootings that have involved law enforcement. And as time goes, you find out more information about how those incidents transpired and what goes on and what's happened. And so you want to be able to say, okay, well, this, we reported on this, or be able to refer back to what you first did, your first report, and say, okay, so here's what's changed from then. And that's how you build an audience that trusts the information that you are providing them. You have to be willing to be flexible. It's no longer, this is it. We're gonna stick with what we said 3 weeks ago, although the information has evolved. You have to be able, news writing, you're telling the story, but you have to be able to be flexible enough to tell the story and roll with the punches as it unfolds. We're not in the business of this is not creative writing. This is, you've gotta be on point with as accurate as you can with the information, so that the reader comes away with an understanding and is a better informed person in your community. That's what makes our system here in the United States of a free, unfettered press so important.
Thank you, Afrique. So Afrique, you just mentioned a whole lot of issues that we're dealing with. It changes day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, right? It seems like right now. And so, Michael, do you think Black communities in North Carolina are relying on local journalism to receive information on the 2020 elections? And what role do you think local and community journalism is playing in this election cycle, given all of the other issues that Afrique mentioned?
I think the Black community is relying on the same kinds of information that everyone else is relying. Local news, their own social networks. There are a lot of people who get their information from Facebook. There are a lot of people who get their information from just their friends. Something that was mentioned that I think is important is being transparent in your reporting process. There was a point when 20, 30 years ago, you work on a story and it just goes into the paper the next day. And that's it. The way that I work now on a daily basis, there are a lot of stories where I will post, if it's a breaking story, I will post something quick, maybe brief, online. And then throughout the day, as I get more information, I'm updating. And one of the things that's very important to me, particularly in terms of the rapid amount of information that's getting thrown at people, is for me to be as clear as possible what I know and what I don't know, what officials are telling me and what officials are not telling me. So as a legal affairs reporter, I'm dealing a lot with law enforcement and prosecutors who tend to be very limited in the amount of information that they provide. So for example, you have a situation where a police officer shoots someone, a Black person. And the police will send out a news release. They will have their own narrative. I think that you as a reporter get as many other sources as you possibly can, but also be very clear what questions that the police are not answering, and put that all out there so that people know, okay, this is what the police is saying. This is what this report I got from other sources. These are the questions that still remain. And you continue to just keep reporting, seeking information until you get a clearer picture of what happened.
Three things stood out to me from what you just said: accuracy, transparency, and being able to ask the right questions so that you get the full picture of what's really happening. So when we think about misinformation, right, and we're seeing that a lot of the misinformation is coming from the highest office in our land in an effort to maintain power in a country that's shifting its demographic makeup really quickly, and the dominance of white supremacy culture being threatened. And Katrina, I'd love you to take this one first. In your experience, how does misinformation affect the Black community's progress in voting in this country? So how do we counter this narrative, right, the misinformation, and really do what Michael was talking about?
I would say, in my experience with Q City Metro being hyper local, and we are also focused on the Black community in Charlotte, it's really linked to us knowing our community and being able to tap into those voices that the community deems trustworthy, right? Because we report the facts. There are times where, and to Michael's point of, especially when we're talking about things that deal with officials and things like that, we just make sure to always bring in those trusted community voices, because it gets rid of, kind of that playing that game of telephone, right? When something that is so impactful, that can impact our community so much, just how does the misinformation is just who has the community said, okay, whether it's a community elder or it's an organization that's nonpartisan or things like that, how do we bring in those voices into our stories to make sure that we're reporting the facts, but it's also, coming from people who, whether it's at that grassroots level or, those folks who have been around. But I think that's what has helped us keep that level of misinformation down, is that we're tapping into those people that our readers have deemed, okay, so-and-so is her, is vouching for this, is confirming this also. That seems trustworthy to them versus, like you said, people are getting their information from, social, or, that need to be quick isn't always the same as being accurate. So how do we take that information that might have came out first and saying, hey, somebody might have reported something, or words are circulating, and kind of fact checking at that point, because I think from what I'm hearing and just talking to residents, some people are saying this is a election, this very crucial and very critical election for, especially with us, we have a lot of first-time voters, and they want to really be engaged in the process. So you want to make sure people, they have the right context, they have that right information, and they know who to tap into.
And Afrique and Michael, I'd love to hear if you feel similarly to Katrina.
Oh, absolutely. She was right on point. Today, I think of like the voter suppression issue. To me, it's not that much different than from what our grandparents or great grandparents faced. They may have faced, the poll taxes, or counting the jelly beans in the jar and reciting paragraphs or, from the Constitution, that sort of thing. But, today you've got, with voter suppression, you've got the whole voter ID, misinformation going about that, and, people being required or being asked to show their ID while in line or whatever. And you've got, a whole host of issues. You've got, that began, like you said in the beginning, with the whole gutting of the Voting Rights Act. I find that when we write on topics that deal with, with the election and what's coming up, we've tried to provide people with the information that makes them not just a more informed voter, but if they are having a problem with finding out whether or not they are registered to vote, and we try to provide them with information of which which board of elections to go to the if you live here in this county where I am, you go to the Guilford County, you call the Guilford County Board of Elections or go on their website, and on there it has people, you can look up your own voter information and tell whether you voted or not. But we try to provide some sort of resource a lot of times at the end of an article on a particular topic that also that would give the reader more information beyond even what we have done in the story. So because that's to me that's super important to tap into other resources.
Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
I think providing just really practical information to people, just to give them, okay, if I run into trouble, this is where I go to. I think that's important. I think that's the basics of just what journalists are supposed to do, whether we're talking about election or whether we're talking about city council, if you have a problem with your trash or whatever, just practical information like this is where you go if you're having trouble with the governmental agency that your taxpayers are paying for. I think the other point, I think from an historical point of view, and I get this because I back in 2016, the trials for both the photo ID and all the other changes on the election laws, that took place here in Winston-Salem in federal court. So I got a chance to cover that, both trials. And what stood out to me during both trials is that, I mean, what's happening now is very, very similar to what happened back then. It's just looks differently. When you had poll taxes, when you had literacy tests, there was nothing in the law that said, we're doing this to discriminate against Black people. It was very race neutral language, although you knew that that's the reason that they were doing it. In the same way as the Fourth Circuit Court ruled in the last lawsuit, there was nothing in the law that said we're doing this against Black people. It's just that it was clearly targeted against Black people because they were targeting certain things like same-day voter registration that Black people used more often. They were targeting early voting that Black people used more often. If you're talking about photo ID, Black people disproportionately don't have the voter IDs that the law said that you had to have. So again, you can have laws that are very race neutral, but we all know that those race neutral laws have a racially discriminatory impact.
Now, a lot of people right now, that's absolutely true, but a lot of people right now are getting their news from social media. I think, Katrina, you mentioned that, right? And Facebook is a big source of news that's being put out there. They've recently said that they would prohibit ads that make premature declarations of victory. They've also said that they won't allow ads with content that seek to delegitimize the outcome of the election. For example, this would include calling a method of voting inherently fraudulent or corrupt, or using isolated incidents of voter fraud to delegitimize the result of an election. So as journalists, how do you weigh whether or not your reporting may feed a narrative that is harmful or erodes the public's confidence in the election? At the same time as you hold the obligation to hold people accountable and report what's actually going on to your readers? How do you hold both those things simultaneously? Katrina, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I'm really big on context, providing context, because it's so easy, especially everybody has a phone with a camera. So you showing me a 10, 15-second clip of something happen, and without context, that can easily turn into, the story of the day. And because we are in that 24-hour news cycle, it spreads like wildfire so fast. So I'm really big on my writing and also our reporters is, if we're telling something, give us some context to the story, and also pointing to if there's something that led to this, if we're talking about something that happened in a meeting, is this precedent? Is this based on, a previous conversation? I'm really big on that because, a lot of times we're reading something, that one piece of information, to rely on someone to do their own research to figure out what else is included in that story. It's hit or miss. So I'm really big on, providing that context. And I think that helps with making sure you aren't going with a narrative that can disparage anybody, because you're leaving out really relevant information that can take you in a different direction.
Afrique, I saw you nodding as Katrina was answering. Do you want to add something?
Sure. I do the same thing. I think the context is very important. Because basically oftentimes the things that make a story go viral on the internet, often it is not in sync with the qualities that make good journalism. So for me, I'm not so crazy about being the first to release something or to break a story. That's not my sole purpose. I want to make sure that it's as accurate information and complete as possible, because you can break a story and it's like there's not a whole lot of meat there. It's nothing there, and people want more, and you don't have what you need to really make it complete. So those things that make things go viral in cyberspace, the scandalous things, the salacious things, the divisiveness that we are experiencing now, the partisanship. There are ways to report that, but you have to give it some kind of context and report on the nuances that occurred to explain why there are multiple sides to an issue, multiple people who are in this camp or this camp. You've got to be able to really explain that and break it down for people. It's not just, oh, they're over here and they're over here. It's not, a lot of times issues are not just that cut and dry. So context is everything.
Michael, did I cut you off?
No, you're fine. I would just add, always more reporting, always more reporting. Don't be too quick to be first, because if you don't, one of the things that I always try and remember is if you don't have a full understanding of what the story is, you don't have a story.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand a thing, you can't write about a thing. And I think that sometimes people are too quick to do hot takes. Okay, we got to get something in the moment. And it ends up being a lot more complicated than you at first think. That's what viral does. It always is worth it to take up. And it may not take like hours. It may take just one more phone call, one more little bit of research before you post a story. But taking that extra time could be worth it, because otherwise you post something too quick without doing the required voting, required reporting, and you're just putting a lot of misinformation out there.
That's a good segue, Michael. Maybe you can just respond to this as well. But what fresh ethical dilemmas do you now need to consider in the context of information disorder?
Mm. Um, I mean, there's a lot that's changed in terms of how I report. I used to, we all used to remember a time where we could have all day to report a story and then file it at the end of the day. But there are times when there's something that's breaking, and it may be something where other people, other news organizations have it. So there's that competitive thing, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, wait, I gotta check some things before I fully report this. So that is an ethical issue, and you have to figure out the times where you kind of push back and say, hey, we can't post this right now because I don't have it yet. Um, there may be times where you just say, I may not have it today, and we have to wait until tomorrow. You have to have those kinds of conversations in your newsroom when there is this real push for content, because in some ways you have fewer bodies in the newsroom. So you have to find a way to provide content. And you don't quite have the story. And you have to have a conversation with people to say, hey, I don't think I have this story yet. And I know that there's competition for this story, but I don't have it. And it would be ethically wrong for us to post a story that's not completely accurate.
Katrina, would you say something similar, or do you have other dilemmas that you could consider?
No, I agree with what Michael said. And then I think for us, because our content is focused on a particular community, a lot of our questions do make race the forefront. When we were first reporting on the coronavirus, the very first was, how is this impacting the Black community? We have other outlets that, that are mainstream that talk about the community overall, but we are focused on a particular community. So whenever we're reporting on issues, that's the angle. And, once, the protests and things started, late in the spring, into the summer, that became kind of like, I guess a lot of it became the standard across reporting overall. I don't think it's a dilemma for us. I just know that I remember a time when, the race question wasn't, at the forefront. But for us, it is important because yes, we want to make sure we have informed citizens in our area and things like that, but we are concerned and about the impact on particular communities. So I don't think it's really a dilemma, but it does pose, sometimes you just have to dig into some tougher questions, just because we don't want to just report the surface level when we're talking about the livelihoods of residents.
Mm-hmm. And Afrique, your publication is 54 years old. So would you say the dilemmas you're seeing now differ from what maybe your parents experienced when they formed the paper, or are they similar, or just taking a different form?
I think they're similar, and they have taken a different form because now the information, or actually the release of information, whether it's accurate or inaccurate, the speed at which that's done is phenomenal. But you have to be aware that you do have an audience that is dependent or depending on you, telling them, giving them the story straight, and for example, like what Katrina was talking about when we first had experienced the pandemic back in March. I was trying to gather, we were trying to, in our newsroom, we were trying to gather the statistics to inform the African American community about, what the incidents of the disease were, and how our rates were higher. And initially, our county public health department didn't have those numbers broken down. It took them maybe about 2 weeks later to start breaking down the numbers based on race. And then you really saw how the disparities affected the Black community and the brown community versus the white community. We got the full view of how the healthcare system in our state and our country has not served certain populations of color in the same way that it served the white community, and how the economics feeds into that. So it's a whole host of issues, and that we have to talk about, or need to talk about, in the stories that we write, that, like Katrina was saying, they're not necessarily written about in mainstream media. They are right now because it's so apparent. It's like the elephant in the room, So people are very much so paying attention to those disparities.
Right. Afrique, you mentioned the speed of information, and Katrina, you talked about, everyone having a phone in their pocket, right? So anyone can spread misinformation, real information, okay, whether innocently or not. What advice would you give to members of your community to ensure they do not spread harmful misinformation online? And anyone can jump in and tackle that. I don't know who wants to go first.
I think when you're reading a story that's like a Facebook-based story, or that's on a website, and it doesn't have an author, or you don't know the origin of the story. It doesn't say from this particular news outlet, or and if you look up the news outlet, it takes you to a link that is not active, or something to that effect. People should be aware that there should be contact information of some sort on a story to connect it to a living, breathing person, not just a corporation or an entity, or just a web address that is almost as bad as 30 years ago having a post office box and that's it. There's got to be something that links that story to an actual person, or a news outlet, that sort of thing. You have to, so that to me, that is, one of the main things to look for. There's some other things people say, if it's written in all caps, you're reading it, or if you see a lot of grammatical errors that aren't necessarily, they would be errors, but you kind of, if you studied like in another language, you can kind of tell that the person who has written it, it's not American English, but they're talking about American politics, and it's like originates somewhere in the middle of Zambia or something. Be wary that there are entities out there that have been hired or paid for, whatever, by another third party to sow disinformation about the Black Lives Matter movement, or our elections process, and all the whole validity that surrounds all of that. That there are ways to be able to track that, and don't just tweet because my friend sent me this topic on Facebook Messenger. Think that that it's true, because sometimes a lot of the groups that they come up with these names are not actual groups.
Yeah, and one of the things that I kind of like, if you Google it, pieces this disinformation, you Google it, you can't find anything else online about it. It's just that one article. That's a clue. Sometimes you can check, sites like Snopes.com and see whether or not there's a fact check on it. you know, if it just seems too good to be true, if it just, you know, this just seems like exactly what I think, maybe not. You know, if it perfectly aligns with how you see something, it may not be, because the truth is messy. The truth is not all neat and in a box with a bow tied on top of it.
Great. Any advice for folks, Katrina? What do you tell them?
I mean, to add, I think they expressed it, expressed all the
Okay.
points that I would make. I would just say, because I know one thing I see a lot is people just share links, and sometimes they just go based off a headline, so they may not even see the actual article or the information. You know, it may be something that's out of date. You know, you're sharing information, and literally this was a story like 5 years ago, and something is completely different now. So I think, you know, sometimes taking that just first basic step of saying, you know, looking for things like you said, like, is it attached to a news outlet, or, you know, a credible source, or even the date of the art, you know, something as simple as that. I would just say, you know, just kind of take that basic first step before saying, let me spread it to my entire network.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the challenges of information going viral so quickly, right? But what are some of the opportunities that you see journalists might have in this digital space, right? Are there any?
Sure, there are. Yes. I think for us, because I can just speak from my experience, because we're digital only, so we don't have a print product, and for us, it has helped with you know, being able to just share information that people didn't know, maybe because they're new to the area. Charlotte is a very transient city. So there's a lot of people who live here who didn't live here a year ago. So they may not have just the institutional knowledge. And I mean, as a you know, a small team, being able to feel like we are providing information that people didn't know, and feel like, okay, we're spreading it to our, you know, our network. You know, there's good awareness, brand awareness that can happen as far as your business for us. You know, so there's those business opportunities, but then also I think that people want to feel like they're in the know. So being able to have that information that people feel like puts them in the know and helping spread it. I think that can help, especially if it's something like it seems like everything's so negative now. So that piece of good news, or, you know, something, that uplifting thing, I think it just helps with the mental and the self-care that we all need a lot of right now. So I think the good side of it is it really can be a breakaway from some of the stuff that we're inundated with, that telling us, you know, the world is chaos right now.
Right. So we have a question from an aspiring journalist in the audience. How would you approach your reporting in your community if election night turns into election week or election month and the results are contested? And I think we all believe that's going to happen, right? Also, I think it's important to center voter suppression in the election coverage. So how do you investigate instances of voter suppression in North Carolina? So that's a two-part question.
First of all, I'm going to get more pizza.
You're going to...
I know that there are also organizations. I think one of the ways, I mean, as a reporter, you're, you know, asking, you know, and trying to monitor on your own instances that you hear about of voter suppression. But you also know that there are, you know, local organizations in your community that are also and will be monitoring complaints about voter suppression. So, you know, see if there are any complaints at your local board of election. see, have contacts with organizations like the ACLU and other organizations in the state and locally that are also monitoring election, and then just report it out. See whether or not you can talk to those people and see what they have to say and see whether or not there's evidence of voter suppression. That's my first thoughts. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add.
How do you handle your reporting if election night turns into election week or election month?
Take a deep breath.
Yeah.
There's not going to be quick answers to that. And my father would probably say, you know what, Black folks in the United States have been oppressed for 400 years now. Something's going on, right? I don't look for the quick answer. It's going to be an ongoing thing that we are striving to achieve. Equality. We are striving, same thing in journalism. We are striving to tell the story. Our role is to tell the story about the election taking a week and why it's going to take a week and why the Postal Service may or may not deliver ballots like it should. And who's behind that. That's the key, is there are policymakers in our country who are steering the ship to do these chaotic things because we could have something, this is my opinion now, I shouldn't do, I'm a journalist, but I'm gonna do this anyway. We should have things in place in our country to be able to have smooth elections so that we don't look like Congo or some other, place that we've always thought of as, or think of as not having, or having to have a third party come in and watch the elections. So, yeah.
Katrina, would you want to add anything? Are you tackling it differently?
Yeah, I think we're already, like I said, I think we're already looking into knowing that, okay, November 3rd, it's not gonna be wrapped in a pretty bow. We have brought in some additional support just because we're a smaller team. So we know that for the nuances that is coming along with this election, that it's an all hands on deck, but it still will always need more hands, right? So just how can we, looking at those stories that we can tell where it's like, okay, we may not break said news, but there is a nuance or an angle that we can bring to it that helps keep the readers informed about, like Afrique was saying, like why is it taking so long, or what's happening that we can add to the conversation that doesn't make the story feel late, if that makes sense. And we just know that right now it's gearing up. How do we get additional support to help tell that, knowing that it's going to extend beyond just November 3rd?
And as was said before, it's going to be like an evolving narrative. And so you're going to have to, journalists are going to have to be incredibly flexible in terms of how they tell a story. No quick answers. And you have to tell your readers that and and make sure that they understand, look, we are trying to answer these questions. Here's what we know now. That may change a day from now. It may change an hour from now. And we just keep reporting. Some of this is going to be new. Some of this is just what journalists do, which is when things like this happen, we just keep reporting and keep reporting and keep reporting. And it's part of it is probably going to be what we tend to call gathering string, like gathering pieces of information until it starts to connect. And then we start to see what the truth is. And that's going to take a while.
Yeah. Our aspiring journalists in the audience asked about how do we investigate instances of voter suppression, and What we're seeing already is that early results on mail-in voting in the state show that Black voters' ballots are getting rejected more than 4 times as often as white voters' ballots. And so what can Black voters do to ensure that their vote is being counted, whether they choose to vote in person or by mail?
So with the Guilford County Board of Elections, you can go on Guilford County, the website for the Board of Elections here, and you can, let's say if you had a mail-in ballot and you wanted to see that mail-in ballot got delivered there, or you even brought it there in person, you can do that too. You go on there and you click on your name, you look up your name. They probably ask for your birth date or something to make sure it's you if you don't have an unusual name like mine. And it'll say that it'll give you the date that your ballot was accepted and counted, and it has all that information there. And for what election, the 2020 general election. So you can do that. And as far as the voter suppression question and how we investigate it, it's like Michael was saying earlier. You know, you've got your organizations like the ACLU, Common Cause, North Carolina. You've got the North Carolina Justice Center, the state NAACP, and your local NAACP offices. There are, and then Legal Aid of North Carolina. You've got a lot of organizations that have their eyes on what's going on across the state with this. Now, what's happening with the voter suppression that dealing with the absentee ballots, mail-in ballots that have been currently mailed in and maybe missing a witness signature. Initially, you know, the state ruled, the State Board of Elections rather, decided, and this was also the Republicans who were on the board and the Democrats decided, I think there may be a couple independents there, but they decided that they would allow the people who cast those ballots to fill out like an affidavit. They have the information to notify those voters. They have their addresses and everything. They can notify those voters, and they would be able to complete an affidavit and say, yeah, this is my ballot or whatever. And that was the decision initially. And then the chairperson of the Board of Elections decided that she, or whoever the person is, was going to call or notify each county board and say, no, hold off on sending out those affidavits. So there's a bit of monkey business going on with that. You know, we initially thought that decision was settled, and now it's stirred. It's the dust is kicked up again. So that's when news folks like us have to be report that and be vigilant and say, hey, you know, we thought it was this, but now, you know, here we are dealing with, you know, something that should be settled that's not settled. And it's quite a good number of ballots, you know, that can definitely decide a few elections. You know.
Absolutely. So we are coming up on 2 o'clock, but we have one more question that I think is actually a good place for us to end. How do you take care of yourself as a Black journalist in this time when everything is fake news, right? Our audience member suggested that pizza seems like a good idea, but what else do you do besides that to take care of yourself? Maybe very quickly. So Michael, let's have you go first. What's your self-care regimen?
I don't know if I have a regimen. People ask me this all the time because of what I cover. So I cover a lot of criminal court. I cover a lot of bad things. And so I get this question a lot. I lean on friends. I hang out with friends. I pursue my interests. I love movies. I love art. I love reading books. So I lean into that as a way of escaping just the day-to-day.
Great. And Afrique, how about you?
I do a lot of gardening. this is bulb season, so I'm in the process of planting. So I take my frustrations and things out on the dirt instead of other people.
That's a good idea.
That's my outlet. Yeah.
And Katrina, what's your self-care go-to?
Yeah, same thing. Family, friends. I like to get out. So whether it's, go out and for a walk or something like that, just kind of like get out and away. Everybody, like now that a lot of things are virtual, if I can stop looking at a screen for any amount of time, that is the most basic self-care. I will take it. So I think, taking away some of the screen time has been, as of late, my form of self-care.
Awesome. Well, listen, I just want to say thank you to the three of you, Katrina, Afrique, Michael. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate you making the time to speak to our audience today about misinformation and what we can do to limit being bombarded by all of that negativity and false fake news, real fake news. And I think it was great that you all offered our audience members some takeaways as well. So I'm going to remind people of what those things are. Get your information from official sources, right? Like the State Board of Elections, from trusted and reputable news organizations. Don't blindly forward things like Katrina mentioned. Double check, triple check your sources. Do what Afrique said, right? Who wrote this article? Is that article linked to any real person? Fact check, fact check, fact check. Michael recommended that we use snoops.com. And so for those of us who, or anyone you know who may have problems voting by mail during either early voting or on election day, we want to encourage you to use the Election Protection Hotline. Okay, that number is 888-OUR-VOTE. You can call that hotline if you're experiencing any problems or if you witness any problems. And so it's clear that misinformation is going to be used to some degree in this election, right? We know this for a fact, and we hope that does not stop anyone from exercising their fundamental democratic right to vote. So if your vote didn't have power, let's remember this, they wouldn't be trying to take it away. So let's make sure our vote is and our voice is heard. So thank you again, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye, guys.
Bye.